Welcome to my channel. Subscribe and enjoy daily stories about cheating, revenge, and relationship advice. The drive home was unusually serene. The city lights flickered past the windows, each one a reminder that the end of the workday was approaching. I couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. Tonight was significant. Amy had been talking about her new boss, Mike, for weeks. She told me about his impressive credentials and their budding professional rapport, and now we'd finally get to meet him. As I turned into our driveway, I glanced at Amy's car, parked neatly in its spot. The front porch light was on, casting a warm glow that promised a cozy evening. I parked and grabbed a bottle of wine from the back seat. Amy had picked out a nice Merlot for the occasion. "Hey, you're just in time," Amy called out from the doorway as I approached. Her smile was as radiant as ever. She looked beautiful in a soft blue dress that complemented her eyes. "Hey, love," I said, pulling her into a quick embrace before stepping inside. "How's it going?" "Great. Mike should be here any minute now," she said, leading me into the living room. Mike was already there, casually leaning against the wall with a glass of wine in hand. His demeanor was relaxed, almost too relaxed for a first meeting. He was well dressed in a tailored suit, his hair impeccably styled. He gave me a firm handshake and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ron, it's good to meet you," Mike said, his voice smooth and confident. "Amy's told me quite a bit about you." "Nice to meet you, Mike," I replied, shaking his hand. "I'm glad we finally get to put a face to the name." "Please, call me Mike," he said. "It's always a pleasure to meet the people who support our team." Amy busied herself in the kitchen, preparing the final touches for dinner. The room was filled with the clinking of cutlery and the soft hum of our conversation. Mike seemed to be in his element, effortlessly engaging in small talk about his recent business trip and his thoughts on current industry trends. As dinner was served, we all sat down at the table. The meal was delicious, a testament to Amy's culinary skills. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and light-hearted anecdotes. I could see how much Amy admired Mike. It was clear she respected his professional acumen. Then, in the midst of a discussion about the latest technological advancements, Mike's demeanor shifted. He took a casual sip of his wine, then looked directly at me, his expression unreadable. "You know, Ron, I've been thinking. Tonight's going to be quite memorable." I glanced at Amy, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. "Oh. How so?" I asked, trying to maintain a polite tone. Mike's next words struck like a bolt from the blue. "I've decided that I'm going to sleep with Amy tonight while you watch." For a moment, the room fell silent. I could feel the blood drain from my face as my mind struggled to comprehend what I'd just heard. Amy's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and embarrassment. "Excuse me." I managed to croak out, trying to keep my voice steady. Mike's tone remained casual, as if he were discussing dinner plans. "You heard me. I think it'll be a unique experience for all of us." I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. "Are you serious?" I demanded, my voice barely contained. "This is some kind of sick joke, right?" Mike's gaze was unflinching. "Not a joke, Ron. I've made up my mind, and I'm not backing down." Amy's voice trembled as she spoke. "Mike, this isn't what we agreed upon." I didn't know you were going to." "It's not about what you agreed upon," Mike cut in. "It's about what I want." I felt a cold rage building inside me. My military training kicked in, and I knew I had to handle this situation with precision. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Mike," I said, my voice low and controlled, "I don't think you understand the gravity of your request. You're crossing a line you shouldn't even be near." Mike's expression shifted from confident to slightly uneasy. "What are you going to do about it?" he asked, his bravado faltering. "I suggest you leave," I said firmly. "And if you don't, you'll be facing consequences you won't like." Amy stood next to me, her hand gripping mine. "Please, Mike. Just go. We don't want any trouble." Mike's bravado crumbled further. He muttered an apology, a strange smile on his face, and quickly excused himself. The door closed behind him with a definitive click, and the silence that followed was heavy and oppressive. Amy and I stared at each other, the shock of the evening sinking in. The excitement of the evening had been replaced by a harsh reality. We had faced an unexpected and disturbing situation, and now it was time to figure out how to handle the aftermath. The front door clicked shut behind Mike, leaving Amy and me in a tense silence. The once pleasant evening had transformed into a battlefield of emotions. I glanced around the living room, my mind racing. The polished wood of the dining table seemed to mock me with its calm, innocent appearance. I needed to regain control and address the gravity of the situation. Amy slumped into a chair, her face pale and her hands trembling. "What just happened, Ron?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't expect this at all. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Neither did I," said, pacing the room. "But we can't let this go. Mike's intentions are beyond unacceptable." I walked over to the display cabinet where I kept my collection of military memorabilia and weapons. Each piece represented a part of my past, my service, my discipline, and my commitment to protecting those I cared about. I approached it with a purpose, knowing that my display of strength needed to convey the seriousness of the situation to Mike, even if I had no intention of using the weapons. Amy watched me with a mix of fear and concern. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice edged with anxiety. "I need to make Mike understand that his actions have consequences," I said. I reached for one of my more intimidating pieces, a vintage, polished handgun. It was a relic from my days in the military, but its presence was more symbolic than practical. I didn't plan to use it, rather, I wanted it to serve as a stark reminder of the seriousness of the threat. I held the gun up, the light reflecting off its cold metal surface. "This isn't a threat," I said calmly. "It's a statement of intent. You crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed." Amy's eyes widened as she took in the sight. "Ron, be careful. I don't want anyone getting hurt." "I'm not going to use it," I assured her. "But Mike needs to know that we're not playing around. This isn't just about words, it's about real consequences." I returned the gun to its place, trying to focus on how best to handle the situation. Amy walked over and took my hand, her touch grounding me. "What do we do next?" she asked. "I've done some research on Mike," I said, pulling out my phone. I showed her the files and articles I had collected. He's been involved in multiple scandals before, each time managing to avoid serious repercussions. He's a repeat offender. Amy scanned the documents, her eyes narrowing as she read through them. "He's gotten away with so much. I had no idea he was like this. We need to make sure he understands that this time is different," I said. "We have to be strategic about it." Amy nodded, her resolve strengthening. "What's the plan?" I walked over to my workbench where I had a knife-throwing board set up for practice. "I've been thinking about how to make our point. We need something that will make a clear impression without crossing any lines ourselves." Amy looked at the board, then back at me. "A knife-throwing board? How does that fit into this?" "It's a way to show him that we're serious," I explained. "It's symbolic. It's about demonstrating that his actions have real consequences, and it's also a way to showcase our control over the situation." Amy seemed to take comfort in the plan. "Okay. Let's do it." As night fell, we set up the board and prepared for Mike's return. I made sure everything was in place, and Amy and I rehearsed our approach. We needed to be firm but not violent, ensuring that Mike understood the gravity of his actions without further escalation. The sound of a car door closing outside signaled Mike's return. He was visibly nervous, his previous confidence replaced with apprehension. As he walked into the living room, he glanced around, his eyes landing on the knife-throwing board. "What's this about?" Mike asked, his voice shaky. "We're going to have a serious discussion," I said, stepping forward. "You've made a mistake, Mike, and we need to address it." Mike's gaze flicked nervously between Amy and me. Look, I didn't mean to cause such a scene. I was just trying to make things interesting. This isn't a game, I said firmly. You've crossed a line. We've done our research, and we know about your history. We're giving you a chance to leave with some dignity before things get worse. Mike's face turned a ghastly shade of white as he took in the implications of our setup. I didn't realize you were this serious, he stammered. I'm sorry. I'll leave. Just please don't. I cut him off with a sharp look. It's too late for apologies. Leave now and don't come back. Mike's shoulders sagged in defeat. He muttered a hurried apology, his face flushed with embarrassment, and quickly exited the house, his footsteps echoing in the quiet night. As the door closed behind him, Amy and I exchanged a look of relief and exhaustion. The evening had been a trial, but we had faced it together. Our resolve had been tested, but we had managed to stand firm. The weight of the confrontation lifted slightly as we settled into the silence that followed, knowing we had taken a stand and defended our boundaries. The living room was still tense, the echoes of Mike's abrupt departure lingering in the air. Amy and I stood in the quiet aftermath, the adrenaline from the confrontation slowly ebbing away. The once inviting atmosphere of our home now felt charged with a sense of urgency and resolve. I can't believe he had the nerve to come back, Amy said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steadier now, but the stress of the evening had left its mark. What do we do now? I took a deep breath, trying to focus on the next steps. We need to plan our approach carefully. Mike needs to understand the seriousness of his actions, but we need to make sure we don't escalate things further. I walked over to my study, where I had gathered information on Mike's past behavior and his numerous scandals. Amy followed me, her face set in determination. I laid out the documents on the desk, showing her the depth of Mike's misdeeds. He's avoided serious consequences before, I said, flipping through the papers. He's used his charm and connections to dodge accountability. We need to make sure that doesn't happen this time. Amy scanned the documents, shaking her head in disbelief. I had no idea he was this bad. It's like he's been skating by without any real repercussions. We can't let him get away with it again, I said. We need to make sure he knows that his behavior has real consequences. And we need to do it in a way that sends a clear message. Amy's eyes lit up with understanding. You mentioned the knife-throwing board earlier. How does that fit into our plan? I walked over to the workbench where the knife-throwing board was set up. The board is a symbol of control and precision. It's a way to show Mike that we're not just talking about consequences, we're prepared to take action if necessary. Amy looked at the board, then back at me. So, we're using it to make a point. But how? I think we need to give him a tangible demonstration, I explained. We'll use the board as a visual representation of the consequences he's facing. It's not about harming him, it's about making him understand the seriousness of the situation. Amy nodded, her expression thoughtful. That makes sense. But we should also make it clear that we're willing to take legal action if necessary. We need him to know that this isn't just about intimidation. Exactly, I said. We'll prepare a brief that outlines his past actions and the potential legal repercussions. We'll give him a chance to leave without further escalation, but we need to make sure he knows we're serious. Amy and I spent the next hour preparing for Mike's return. We drafted a letter outlining the consequences he faced if he didn't change his behavior. I also made sure the knife-throwing board was set up in a way that would be intimidating but not dangerous. As we finished our preparations, Amy looked at me with a mixture of anxiety and resolve. Do you think this will work? Will Mike understand? It has to, I said. We're not just trying to scare him, we're trying to hold him accountable. We need to make sure he knows we're not going to back down. Amy took a deep breath, her determination clear. All right. Let's do this. Later that evening, Mike arrived at our home again, his demeanor markedly different from the previous night. He seemed nervous, his usual confidence replaced by a palpable sense of unease. Mike, I said, greeting him at the door. Thank you for coming back. We need to talk. Mike stepped inside, his eyes immediately drawn to the knife-throwing board. I see you've set up something special, he said, his voice wavering. This is about more than just a display, I said, guiding him to the living room where we had set up the documents and the board. We've done our research, and we're giving you a chance to make things right. Mike glanced at the documents and the board, his face growing increasingly pale. Look, I didn't mean to cause all this trouble. I just thought, Mike, I interrupted, holding up the letter we had prepared. We've outlined the consequences of your actions. We're giving you an opportunity to leave now and avoid further escalation. If you choose not to, there will be legal and social repercussions. Mike took the letter and skimmed through it, his hands trembling. I see. I didn't realize it was this serious. It is, I said firmly. We're not here to negotiate. We're here to make sure you understand that your behavior has consequences. Leave now, and we'll consider this matter closed. Mike looked at us, his fear evident. All right. I'll go. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. He hurriedly gathered his things and left the house, casting one last nervous glance at the knife-throwing board as he exited. The door closed behind him with a final thud, leaving us in the quiet of the aftermath. Amy and I exchanged a relieved but exhausted look. We had faced a difficult challenge and navigated it with firmness and resolve. The evening had tested our limits, but we had emerged stronger and more united. As we settled into the quiet of our home, we knew that we had taken the necessary steps to address the situation and safeguard our boundaries. The night had settled into an uneasy calm. Mike's second visit loomed as an unavoidable climax to the tense drama that had unfolded. The living room was now arranged like a stage for a final confrontation. The knife-throwing board stood in the corner, a stark reminder of the seriousness with which we intended to address Mike's behavior. Amy and I had spent the past hour making sure everything was in place. We had carefully laid out the letter detailing the potential consequences of Mike's actions and ensured that the knife-throwing board was positioned prominently. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and a hint of anxiety. We were ready, but the weight of the situation made the air feel heavy. The doorbell rang, piercing the silence. I glanced at Amy, who nodded, her expression resolute. We had agreed on a clear, firm approach, no backing down, no compromises. I opened the door to find Mike standing on the porch, looking more apprehensive than before. His usual air of confidence was replaced by a nervous fidgeting. "Hi," he said, forcing a strained smile. "I came back, as requested." "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let him enter. "We need to finalize our discussion." As Mike walked into the living room, his gaze immediately fell on the knife-throwing board. He swallowed hard, his eyes widening with visible discomfort. Amy and I were already seated, the documents and the board positioned for maximum impact. Mike's voice trembled as he spoke. "So, what's this about? I see you're serious." "Very serious," I replied, my tone firm but controlled. "We've prepared a document outlining the potential legal and social consequences of your behavior. This isn't just about intimidation, it's about accountability." I handed him the letter, which he took with shaking hands. He skimmed through it, his face growing increasingly pale as he read. "I didn't realize you'd gone to such lengths," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I really didn't mean to push things this far." Amy took a deep breath, her voice steady but filled with the weight of the evening's events. "Mike, this isn't just about what you intended. It's about the impact of your actions. We've seen how you've managed to avoid serious consequences before, but that ends here." Mike's eyes darted nervously between us and the knife-throwing board. "Look, I'm sorry. I didn't understand the full extent of your feelings. I was out of line." "We're giving you a chance to make this right," I said. "You can leave now, and we'll consider the matter resolved. If you choose not to, we will take the necessary actions to ensure you understand the seriousness of this situation." Mike's voice was almost pleading. "I really didn't want any trouble. I thought it would be a joke. I'm sorry. I'll leave, I promise." "Good," I said, my voice firm. We expect you to respect our boundaries and not return. Mike hurriedly gathered his belongings, his movements quick and anxious. As he picked up his coat, he cast one last, fearful glance at the knife-throwing board. I understand. I won't come back. I'm sorry for everything. Amy watched him with a mixture of relief and sadness. Just remember, Mike, actions have consequences. It's better to learn that lesson now than to face more serious repercussions. Mike nodded vigorously, his face flushed with embarrassment. I understand. Thank you for giving me a chance to leave with some dignity. He hurried to the door, opening it and stepping into the night. The door closed behind him, and the sound seemed to echo with finality. The living room was silent once more, the tension of the evening lifting slowly. Amy turned to me, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and exhaustion. We did what we had to do, she said quietly. It wasn't easy, but we stood our ground. I nodded, wrapping an arm around her. We did. And now, we can focus on moving forward. We've faced this challenge together and come out stronger. We sat together in the quiet of our home, the events of the evening settling into a shared memory. The confrontation had been intense, but it had reinforced our commitment to each other and our determination to set clear boundaries. As the night deepened, we knew that we had taken a stand and defended our values, and that strength would carry us forward.